Wendy Hardman, thank you so much for joining us, and you're here to tell us a little bit about your experience in working with online learning solutions. So tell me a bit about your current role in working in learning solutions for different organizations.
Sure, and thanks for inviting me, Laura. I have worked in training and development for probably longer than maybe I care to comment, but e-learning has evolved quite a bit since I first started working in it, and most of my work my role has been as an instructional designer and or sometimes a project manager for a variety of training programs online, as well as a number of educational courses that are offered online, working with various faculty members and so on as well. And so I like the design part the best because it's kind of creative, and lets you use your imagination and crafting as an experience that's going to engage the learner and get them to their destination. And increasingly, it's exciting to see more possibilities and ways of combining technology, whether it's synchronous parts or asynchronous pieces, and self-study and various other modes of learning. So I think it's never been as exciting as it is now, and there's so much choice and flexibility, mobility options, and so on that it makes it really really amazing, the possibilities that are available.
Great. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you approach getting some of these contract jobs. And I know that you respond to RFPs relatively selectively. Tell me a little bit about your criteria for choosing RFPs to which you want to respond.
Okay. I find most of my work projects without using not through RFPs. I tend to rarely respond to RFPs unless it's something that I know is just like a great fit for me, or in some cases I've actually had a friend say, Wendy, would you please respond to this because we'd like to have you to put your proposal in. And I find that I can network and work and kind of find opportunities through other ways besides RFPs, because RFPs can be a large chunk of work, so that's a good thing, but they also take a large commitment in terms of time in developing the proposal and putting that forward, and so if you're working on your own or as a contractor, the only resource you really have is your time. So you get to choose how you use your time. And if you are looking at something that you could put, 40 hours or more into, and there's no guarantee of work, or it could be even a larger commitment by the time you actually get your proposal in, you have to consider, am I in a position that's going to make sense for me? Or should I be focusing on something that's going to be a little bit more, should I be using my time differently? And that's always your choice. You can spend your time the way you want to, but it's not the same as someone who's working in a salaried role where you get paid whether you do something or not. Really, you're paid to be there all the time, and how productive you are is so much more under your control. So I see that as an important differentiation between somebody who's working on their own, one contract to contract, or as an more entrepreneurial than it would be for someone who's in a position where maybe your organization decides to go after an RFP. That's a whole different dynamic. So that what I'm saying doesn't really apply in that situation so much. Excuse me.
Now, regardless of whether you're working on an RFP response or working towards some type of a contract project, you go through a process to cost out, to estimate what it's going to cost you, and to estimate how you're going to finance that job. Can you tell us a little bit about that process that you go through?
Sure. The idea of costing out when you look at a project that you want to work on, I always find I try to work it out a couple of different, at least 2 or 3 different ways to estimate it. So you're kind of looking at it from different points of view. And if you actually work with another colleague, or you have someone that you might have worked with on e-learning projects, then sometimes their input, 2 heads are always better than 1 in working out a project that may be may not be very well defined, because generally speaking most RFPs are not, and so then you go, well, it's not really clear whether they're going to do a pilot study or not, or pilot test, or it's not really clear how many units they're looking for, or it's not really clear. There's a lot of gray stuff that sometimes you'll see some of it and sometimes you won't see it. So another head, or even someone that you work with or have worked with to help you do that, can be really valuable. But in terms of how would you look at something from 2 or 3 different ways? Well, if you know, for example, that an RFP is a request for a certain number of additional units, let's supposing that it's an organization that wants another component added to their e-learning, and let's suppose they have said that they want a certain number of hours of training or a certain number of modules, so that you can get a handle on sort of what the end result is desired, the desirable end result. And then you can sort of say, okay, there's some formulas, there's some numbers out there available. If you do a little research, you probably looked at them in maybe your other courses. The American Society for Training and Development, ASTD, offers a really good grid that says, you know, for every hour of training course, it was probably going to take you X number of hours to prepare. So, for example, for e-learning, it could easily be between 90 and 100 hours for every hour of course. Of learning experience. So then you sort of figure that out, and you say, oh, how much time is this going to take me to do that? And you can sort of just put just a general number. So let's say it takes 90 hours, or let's say it takes 100 hours to create 1 hour of content. And if the end result of the RFP you're interested in is 5 hours, then that would be 500 hours of your time to create the results. And whether that's you personally or the team you're working with, but that's everything from the idea of the visioning and the design and some of the other things, to the process of creating the templates, to actually ending up creating the content and launching it and so on. So you can see that takes you through. So you got 500 hours, and you sort of say, what's my average, what do I usually charge, or what's my normal rate for that project? Okay, so that's one way. Then if you look at it a second way, you might decide to look at it from the point of view of, I did a project something like that just last month, or I just finished a project like that. And then you take kind of how that worked. Did you get paid what you wanted to? And if you didn't, what would you like to have made? And then you kind of compare and you work it out based on your experiences of how much time it took you, because then you have a sense of what it is and how that would work out. And then thirdly, you can also work it out if you want to just take a project or an RFP that proposes a project, and you might say, well, you know, I found that from my past experience in working with several other team members, that we usually find that the design part is sort of tends to be a significant chunk. So we estimate that the design part might take, let's say, 30% or 35% or 40% of the time, and then the actual next parts are, you kind of work out a percentage of the time for each of the other pieces of the development process. And then you can sort of say, well, when I do design work, I normally like to charge $125 an hour, so that's going to be that. When I'm working on some of the development and building it, you know, that's not quite the same. Or if I'm doing research work, if I'm doing some needs assessment or doing some of that, that's $75 an hour work. And if I'm doing this work, it's because we're not always doing the same value of work at the time if you do the entire project. So then you've got a third methodology that will let you work out what you think this project will cost you. And you might think that it's not necessarily good use of your time to take all of this time to noodle around. But don't forget, you're putting your name, your reputation, and a commitment to do a job out there, and there's no reason you should not be reasonably awarded or recognized for it, because everybody goes to work and expects to be reasonably well paid for what you do. And so it's not trying to be necessarily the cheapest, but you want to know what it would cost you to do. And I've always found that when I put in on RFPs, I tend to try to work on them as being a project price. I know what all the pieces break out to be, so I can monitor as I'm going along to make sure I'm not getting too far off track. But I find that putting in a single price, rather than trying to say I'm going to do this much for this many hours and telling them all the details of how you're going to do it, I find that I can do it more quickly in some places, and some places I get bogged down. That's my choice. Rather than saying, I'll do a project and I'm going to charge you this much when I'm doing this, and this much when I'm doing this, and this much when I'm doing this. Because I just prefer not to work that way. So I end up with a single price, and I normally do very well on that, because sometimes I can go faster than I expected or not. So, but the importance of actually costing it out from more than one way is really critical to recognize you and compensate you for the great work you're doing.